On this Sunday night, a mass shooting near a Lunar New Year celebration. The search for the suspect after 10 people are killed.
We don't know if this is specifically a hate crime defined by law.
Protests over the burning of a Quran, Turkey's fury, and the fallout. Plus, without water.
I'm using rainwater in here to even wash my hands with.
The small Arizona community facing dire supply shortages after a severe drought. And bidding farewell.
Some would say that a broken heart was the doing of her death.
Hundreds gather at Graceland for Lisa Marie Presleys public memorial.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Nitu Gunshot.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Police in California say the suspect in a mass shooting during Lunar New Year celebrations is now dead. SWAT officers surrounded a white van for hours today, trying to determine whether a man barricaded inside was the person responsible for taking the lives of 10 people.
As Torrance officers pulled behind the vehicle, the white van entered a shopping center parking lot. When officers exited their patrol vehicle to contact the occupant, they heard one gunshot coming from within the van.
Police say the 72-year-old suspect died at the scene from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Investigators found several items inside the van connecting him to the crime scene. As Jennifer Johnson reports, police are now trying to figure out what motivated this latest mass shooting in the U.S.
Additional units requested, multiple victims, gunshot wounds.
A celebration turned into a nightmare after a gunman opened fire inside a crowded ballroom dance studio in Monterey Park. Witnesses say the suspect, described as an Asian male, pulled out a gun and began shooting wildly. He reportedly fled in a white van. Several hours later, a police SWAT team pulled over a similar-looking vehicle about 45 kilometers away. The driver was found inside, dead.
There is a tactical incident that's occurring in the city of Torrance that is being covered. People have asked, is that your suspect? We don't know.
Police and the FBI are investigating whether this was a hate crime. The community is home to mostly Asian immigrants or first-generation Asian Americans. Last night's celebration was part of a two-day Lunar New Year event that has attracted up to 100,000 people to this small city in previous years. Many outside the club first mistook the gunfire for fireworks.
It's very surprising, shocking to hear that something like this went on in not only a small city, but my city.
Investigators are looking into whether a man who pulled out a gun at another ballroom studio later Saturday night in nearby Alhambra is connected to this case. Patrons apparently wrestled that man to the ground, but he got away. Local residents and leaders are devastated.
This is a time to be with family, to celebrate, and yet this tore a hole through all of our hearts.
This tragedy is the 5th mass murder shooting in the U.S. this year and is the deadliest since May 2022, when 21 people were killed in a school in Uvalde, Texas. 2022 was one of the nation's worst years for mass killings. U.S. President Joe Biden tweeted that he and the First Lady are praying for those killed and injured, while some in Congress are again demanding stricter gun laws.
We're dealing with the tragedy of mass shootings, which is sadly a uniquely American experience. It happens over and over and over again.
Now, another community will be burying friends and loved ones in the days to come, as the investigation into why this happened begins. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
The shooting in California is hitting home at Lunar New Year celebrations across Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau attending festivities in Vancouver. He acknowledged the tragedy and says his government will be there for whatever support Canada can offer.
Of course, these celebrations will be tinged with sadness and support for the community in California that is reeling right now after the horrific news coming out last night in Monterey Park.
In Turkey, there is uproar and political tension over a far-right demonstration in Sweden. Thousands are now showing their anger after an anti-Islam politician was allowed to protest outside the Turkish embassy in Stockholm and then burn the Quran, the holy text of Islamic faith. And as Mackenzie Gray explains, the backlash to this hateful act is now jeopardizing Sweden's hopes of joining NATO at the 11th hour.
There's outrage in Ankara and across Turkey for the second day in a row. Protesters furious at the Swedish government. At issue, the burning of a Quran outside the Turkish embassy in Stockholm.
But this man wants me to go on and burn the Quran immediately, and I think that is a completely reasonable request.
The man behind it is Rasmus Paludan, a Danish politician, the leader of a far-right anti-Islam party that has no seats in the Danish parliament. There were seemingly more police than protesters at the demonstration, but the fact it was sanctioned at all has Turks up in arms. It's unacceptable that Swedish authorities are allowing such kind of provocative action in front of an embassy, said this protester. We cannot accept the burning of a Quran under the umbrella of freedom of expression and human rights, added this politician. The Swedish foreign minister has called the burning appalling, but a more blunt message in the window of the Swedish consulate in Istanbul. We do not share that book-burning idiot's view. A diplomatic row between Sweden and Turkey has far-reaching international consequences, even for Canada. Sweden dumped its policy of neutrality after Russia's invasion of Ukraine and asked to join NATO. But the only way into the alliance? Approval from all 30 members, including Turkey. The Turkish government has given a long list of demands to the Swedes, including the banning of Kurdish groups that are outlawed in Turkey and considered terrorist groups by the US and EU, as well as extraditing alleged Kurdish fighters living in Sweden. The Swedes say they can't fulfill all of Turkey's demands, but they're still confident they'll be let into NATO.
We believe very strongly that we have done what was being asked by us, and we do not see any reason for the ratification not to start.
Canada was the first country to approve Sweden's NATO membership, but it looks like in the end, it will be up to Turkey to decide if they'll get in. Mackenzie Gray, Global News, Ottawa.
In Syria, at least 16 people have been killed after a building collapsed in the northern city of Aleppo. Dozens of firefighters, first responders, and residents are combing through the rubble for survivors. The building housed about 30 people in a neighborhood under the control of Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. They blame the Syrian government for obstructing efforts to stabilize and restore life in the area. Many buildings in Aleppo were destroyed or damaged during Syria's 11-year conflict. U.S. President Joe Biden faces more political scrutiny after more old classified documents were found in his Delaware home. According to Biden's lawyer, the FBI discovered 6 more sensitive files at the home during a nearly 13-hour search on Friday, voluntarily allowed by the president. Some documents were from his time as vice president in the Obama administration, others from his time as senator. It's the latest batch of files after Biden's attorneys previously revealed others were found at the home and at a former office. A dire situation is unfolding in a small Arizona community where residents have been cut off from access to drinking water in the middle of an extensive ongoing drought. The unincorporated community of Rio Verde Foothills sits just outside the city of Scottsdale, and until a few weeks ago, it trucked in water from the city. That was until the taps were turned off. Jackson Prosco reports on a community running dry in a state where water is increasingly scarce.
These are tough times for the 2,400 residents of Rio Verde Foothills.
We're just using our buckets from the garage right now and collecting the rainwater.
They're forced to save every drop of water because they have no other choice.
I'm using rainwater in here to even wash my hands with, to rinse dishes with, for flushing the toilets.
The crisis began 3 weeks ago after the nearby city of Scottsdale stopped selling water to residents of the unincorporated community, where homes are not connected to any water supply.
I just cannot believe that a group of people would look at their neighbors and say, we're going to slowly kill off your community.
For years, Scottsdale, with its lush golf courses and manicured lawns, has warned its water supplies were getting tight. After 3 decades supplying Rio Verde Foothills, the taps were finally turned off January 1st.
They should manage their own destiny with their own water. We have to adapt and then we have to adapt more, and we have to adapt more.
Just crack that faucet when you rinse, okay?
The result is that families like the Rhymes can't bathe or do laundry or dishes as they try to stretch what little is left in their own water tanks.
We probably have about a week to 2 weeks.
They're left to rely on private trucks to haul in water from increasingly expensive and far-flung locations.
When you have to pay more for water than your mortgage is also crazy. And that's the situation we're in right now.
Experts warn it's a cautionary tale about living off the grid in an era when water is increasingly scarce.
It really was not reasonable for them to expect that they had a forever supply.
The best hope may come from a Canadian company, Epcor, which has proposed building a dedicated supply for residents. If approved, it would take at least 2 years to build.
The solution is feasible. There'll be some difficult times. We'll have to negotiate with a couple different interested stakeholders in terms of making sure that their water rights are, preserved.
Until then, residents of Rio Verde Foothills are living on borrowed time and borrowed water.
My community is beautiful. It's the most special place in Arizona. And if it doesn't have water for the people that live there, it's going to die.
Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Population boom or bust. Coming up, Atlantic provinces are growing, but will it have a positive impact for residents? The Vancouver Canucks fired head coach Bruce Boudreau this morning after rumors swirled for several days of an impending coaching change. Canucks GM Patrick Alvin acknowledged the emotional reaction from fans, but says he's focused on the team's long-term direction.
This is a decision that based on results and based on a process and where we are right now and where we want to move forward here. This is not something we came up with, last week. This has been on top of my mind here since I took the job and where we envision this club going.
Replacing Boudreau as head coach is Rick Tocchet. The Maritime provinces are taking stock of a mixed blessing, a phenomenal population increase in some cities. The surge is filling labor gaps and making communities more diverse. But as Ross Lord reports, there's a challenge in preventing the influx from making conditions worse in healthcare and housing.
As the population of Canada approaches the 40 million mark, the way we're growing has led to a phenomenal trend on the East Coast.
We want people to move here. We want people to settle and choose Nova Scotia as their home.
And it's working. The population of Canada grew by 1.8% last year, with cities growing by 2.1%. Here's where things get unusual. The fastest growing cities are Halifax at 4.4% and Moncton, New Brunswick at 5.3%. It's the first time in decades maritime urban centers have led the way.
This past year has really seen a boost in flows from other parts of Canada.
Danny Waldman and his family moved recently from Toronto to the Halifax area.
We had spent many years there. We started to raise our kids there. We are outdoor people and really wanted to be much closer to the water. And when COVID hit, my wife had this sense that now was the time, and here we are.
The Terrell family also left southern Ontario to start a new life in small-town New Brunswick.
There were a lot of pluses on getting out of Ontario and getting to a smaller community out here as well, to try and stave off catching COVID any way we could.
Terrell says the move is working out. He and his wife found jobs quickly. More difficult was finding a family doctor.
It's definitely a little more challenging than Ontario.
Attracting newcomers to fill labor gaps without compounding problems in housing and healthcare isn't easy.
We have some of these social issues and challenges that are rising up, but at the same time, we have incredible investment in our community. So trying to keep both things balanced is the eternal challenge right now.
To get that balance right, the Nova Scotia government is recruiting more healthcare workers from overseas and refining immigration strategies.
So a couple different working groups and committees have been are in the works of forming and meeting.
The stakes are high, especially for a healthcare system plagued by a growing number of emergency room horror stories.
These aren't easy problems to solve, but the the reality is we do need more people here.
Analysts say continuing the Maritimes' population momentum desperately requires more housing construction. Otherwise, they say newcomers will move on to other destinations. Ross Lord, Global News, Halifax.
Ahead, hundreds gather to mourn at Lisa Marie Presleys memorial. Lisa Marie Presley was laid to rest today. A memorial service for the only child of Elvis Presley was held on the lawn at Graceland in Memphis, Tennessee, the home where she lived with Elvis as a child. As Mike Armstrong explains, her life was filled with twists and turns, and the service was emotional.
There was a challenge for the organizers behind the service. According to the first speaker of the day, among Lisa Marie Presley's wishes for how she wanted to be remembered were 4 words.
Don't make it sad. Lisa, we will try to honor you and honor your wish today.
All these relief giver.
It may have been a simple request, but it was one that was hard to deliver. Presley died earlier this month of a cardiac arrest at just 54 years old. Just a few days earlier, she'd attended the Golden Globes and walked the red carpet with someone she knew her entire life. Jerry Schilling was a close friend of Elvis and later gave Lisa Marie her first job working as his assistant.
Every couple of weeks, she would come in, very disgruntled look on her face. Somebody else wants to talk to you about Lisa Marie. They had no idea they were talking to her on the phone.
She was famous from the day she was born. The only child of Elvis Presley, she dealt with the weight of that fame, but also carried pride. When Elvis died in 1977, Lisa Marie was at home with him at Graceland. She inherited the residence, and it eventually became a museum to the man known as the King of Rock and Roll.
She was a conduit to the throne, the keeper of the flame. She was the image of a king.
Now, Presley had struggles. There was a battle with addiction, a business manager who cost her millions, and 4 marriages, including one to Michael Jackson. But there was also a more recent tragedy, the death by suicide in 2020 of her only son.
Survivors, guilt, some would say, but a broken heart was the doing of her death.
Lisa Marie Presley is being buried at Graceland, near her father and directly beside her son. Mike Armstrong, Global News.
Actor Jeremy Renner is still on the mend weeks after a freak snowplow accident threatened his life. In an Instagram post, the 52-year-old Avengers actor thanked everyone for their messages and thoughtfulness. He also reveals he broke more than 30 bones, but says they will mend and grow stronger. Renner was crushed by his own snowplow while operating it on New Year's Day. He suffered multiple chest and orthopedic injuries and required multiple surgeries. Next, a look at how Lunar New Year is being marked around the world. From London to Beijing, Lunar New Year events were still in full swing around the world today, with many partaking in festivities and prayers to mark the start of the Year of the Rabbit, an important celebration in East Asian culture. Though some festivities in this country are more subdued and somber in light of the tragedy in the U.S., Lunar New Year events were also underway across Canada. Xin Feng is an expert on Chinese culture and traditions at the Concordia University of Edmonton and an organizer of a celebration there. I spoke with her earlier this weekend on its importance for students and the Chinese community. Xin, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, tell us what's happening at the Student Center.
Okay, first of all, happy Lunar New Year. So we're here to celebrate the
the Lunar New Year of the Rabbit at Concordia University of Edmonton. My Chinese language course students are going to sing the Chinese New Year song they just learned, and the Concordia alumni are going to perform a fancy Kung Fu show. And behind me you can see we have the extension continuing education students are performing Tai Chi, and we have a workshop on Chinese Presleys hosted by a Chinese visiting teacher, and we have the calligraphy workshop hosted by an international exchange student. You can see a lot of decorations in red here, red lanterns, red Chinese knots, red fish, red apples. I'm going to give out a lot of red envelopes to the lucky people.
And as you mentioned, according to Chinese astrology, this is the year of the water rabbit. What does this represent for 2023?
Okay, sure. So the year of the rabbit, according to the Chinese culture, the water falls into the 5 elements, 5 wu xing, the water, the fire, the earth, the wood, and the metal. And the water rabbit will appear every 60 years. So 5 elements work together with the 12 zodiac, or we call it earthly branches. And in ancient agricultural Chinese society, there's a saying, when the rabbit water year comes, there's short spring and the fall. What does it mean? If you look at the Chinese lunar calendar in 2023, you actually will see 2 Februaries. That probably just means there's going to be a long winter and a long summer. So we always believe for the year of the rabbit, if you are born in the year of the rabbit, you are supposed to be generous, tender, genuine, and get along with well with your friends around you. And we have a prediction this year going to be the year of the hope. And according to the Chinese New Year prediction, this year we'll have more bunny baby born. According to the demographic statistics, the year of the rabbit always have the highest birth rate in China. I guess Chinese parents love the bunnies.
I guess that is what that highlights, isn't it? We'll let you get back to your event now, Xin. Thank you so much for inviting us there and for your insight.
Thank you. Happy Lunar New Year. 新年好.
And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. We leave you tonight with scenes from Montreal's Lunar New Year celebrations as our thoughts remain with all those affected by the Monterey Park tragedy. Thanks so much for watching. Donna will be back with you tomorrow. Have a great night.